Looking to sew something effortlessly stylish for the summer? In today's sew along, we're making this dreamy jumpsuit in a vintage-inspired indigo leaf print cotton shirting from Threadymade. With its open back detail, sleeveless lined bodice, and wide cropped legs, this pattern has all the makings of a modern classic. The fit is easy and relaxed thanks to the elasticated back and side zipper, and yes, there are pockets. Let's dive in and sew this summer staple together step by step. Here is one of my front bodice pieces and I've marked my darts. Now I'll pin them in place. Sew from the outside edges to the point, leaving thread tails at the points so you can tie them in knots. Then press your darts downward. Place your back bodice pieces right sides together with the front bodice, aligning the shoulder seams and pin in place. Sew the shoulders with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and press the seams open. Repeat the exact same process to create your lining from your remaining front and back pattern pieces. Place them right sides together. Pin the neckline and the armholes. Sew the neckline from the center back edge across the seams to the center back edge on the opposite side. And sew both of the armholes, all with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Clip into the curves of the armholes and the neckline. Now we're going to understitch the neckline of the front bodice. Since my main and lining fabrics are the same, the direction to which I choose to press and stitch the seam allowance of the front bodice will designate which side becomes my lining. So I'll press that seam allowance toward one bodice piece. We'll reach in between the two bodice pieces and we'll stitch that front neckline seam allowance to the lining side of the front bodice with about an 1/8 inch seam allowance, as close as you can get from one seam to the other. Now that neckline is understitched toward the lining, we're going to reach in between those fabrics once again, this time to pull the back bodice pieces through the shoulder seam, pulling everything to the right side. Then give your front and back bodice pieces and all those seams a good press. For the back bodice pieces, I'm going to open out the main and lining away from each other so that the main side of the fabric faces me. And I'll place the short ends of my tie pieces right sides together with each side. Pin in place across those main and lining seams to attach the full length of the short end of the tie. Sew the ties in place with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now that my ties are attached to each of the center backs, I'm going to fold each of the ties in half right sides together with themselves. And I'll pin them from the tie seam along the tie end, pivoting to also pin to the corner of the tie. Now I'll sew each tie once again from the seam, pivoting at the corner to the end of the tie. Trim the corners of each tie. Before I turn my ties right side out, I'm quickly going to sew the side seams for the front and back bodice pieces, placing my front and back pieces and their linings right sides together, with those seams opened out so that the right side of the fabric for the main and lining are facing me. Align the underarm seam and pin from the bottom of the lining straight across the seam to the bottom of the main. Sew these seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then we can turn everything right side out, including the ties. I've applied interfacing to the wrong side of each of my pocket pieces along those slant edges. Now I'll finish the raw edge of the slant. Now I'll press it to the wrong side. And I'll top stitch close to my finishing stitches. Now that the slanted edge is top stitched and finished, I've also finished the inner longer edge of the pocket as well as the bottom edge. And I'll press those finished edges to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch. With those edges tucked under, place the wrong side of the pocket onto the right side of the corresponding front pant piece. Pin in place along the edges. For the folded bottom and side edges of the pocket, we're going to top stitch edge stitching close to those folded edges. For the side and the top, we're going to baste those edges in place. Repeat to create both front pocket pieces. One side of your pant will have a finished side seam and the other will have an invisible zipper. For whichever side seam that you'd like to be finished, place those corresponding front and back pieces right sides together and pin the side seam. Now we'll sew this side seam from the top to the bottom with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges together. Here are my front and back pieces opened out away from each other, and I've pressed my seam toward the back pant piece. Now I'll place them back right sides together and pin the inseam. Sew the inseam from top to bottom with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges together, then press them toward the back pant piece. Here are the remaining front and back pant pieces, and I've gone ahead and finished the side seams separately. For my 10-inch invisible zipper, I've gone ahead and opened it up and pressed the coils open. Now I'll place one side of the zipper tape right sides together with the finished edge of the front pant and pin in place. I want my top zipper stop to be about 1/2 of an inch away from the top raw edge of the pant. Using a zipper foot or an invisible zipper foot, sew from the top to as far as you can get to the bottom of the zipper. Now that one side of the zipper is sewn, I'll place the opposite side of the zipper right sides together with the remaining back pant piece. And pin in place so that once again the top zipper stop is 1/2 of an inch away from the top raw edge of the pant. Then we can sew this side of the zipper in the same way as we did for the other side. Now with the front and back pieces right sides together along that side seam, we're going to pin them from where our zipper stitching stopped to the bottom of the pant. We'll sew from where our zipper stitches stopped, back stitching to secure, and sew to the bottom of the pant with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to start my stitches with my zipper foot so that I can sew as close to those zipper stitches as possible. And once I've sewn about 2 to 3 inches, I'll switch back to my regular foot. I've pressed my finished side seam open. Now I'll place this front and back pant set right sides together and pin the inseam. Then I can sew the inseam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges together, and press them toward the back in the same way as we did for the opposite pant set. Here is one set of legs turned wrong side out, and the opposite set turned right side out. I'll place this set inside the other, aligning the crotch seam and pinning in place. Sew this crotch seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges together. Here is the wrong side of the top inner edge of my back pant piece. With my zipper folded to the inside as it will be when zipped, I finish the top edges from the zipper to the side seam, leaving those top edges of the front pant piece unfinished for now. And I've pressed that finished edge of the back pant piece to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch. This will be our casing. I'm going to edge stitch along the outermost edge of my finishing stitches from the zipper to the side seam, backstitching to secure. Now that I've finished sewing the casing along the top of the back pant piece, I'm going to snip into the seam that connects the front and back pieces by about 3/8 of an inch to release the front piece. This will now create a clean front seam allowance to attach the bodice later. I'm using 1/4 inch elastic for my back waistband. I'm going to attach a safety pin along one short edge and draw it through from the side seam to the zipper. You can now try the pant on to make sure that it fits snugly along the back of your waist. This will help you determine if you need to trim the elastic at this point. Once you're happy with the fit, baste the elastic in place along both ends. For the back bodice pieces, I should have finished those bottom edges earlier when we finished the bodice, but we'll do it now. Place the bottom raw edges of the back bodice piece right sides together. And your tie will be sandwiched in between. Pin from the side seam to the tie. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance from the side seam to the tie seam, repeating for the bottom raw edges of both back bodice pieces. And then just pull those ties out to turn everything back right side out. Now we want to release the seam allowances for the bottoms of the front bodice piece, just as we did for the tops of the front pant piece. Snipping into those side seam allowances by 3/8 of an inch at the side seam. This opens out those front seam allowances at the bottom to give us the material we need to attach the bodice to the pant. Place both layers, the main and lining of the front bodice, right sides together with the top of the pant. Since I've used the same material for my bodice lining, the understitched side should be facing me. Pin in place from side seam to zipper. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance from side seam to zipper, then finish those raw edges together and press down toward the pant. Here's the inside of my pant at the seam that connects the front bodice to the front pant, and I've pressed that seam downward. Now I'm going to top stitch the seam allowance to the top of the pant, from one side to the other. Before you hem the bottom of the pants, go ahead and try them on to determine how wide of a hem you'd like to create. I've pressed my raw edges to the wrong side twice by about 5/8 of an inch both times. Now I'll edge stitch along the upper inner fold all the way around, repeating for both pant legs. And now the jumpsuit is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.